The rain came down like bullets that Tuesday evening, turning the quiet highway into a river of chaos. Sarah Martinez pulled her old Honda to the side of the road, windshield wipers working overtime but barely keeping up with the storm. She was driving home from her double shift at the diner when she spotted him through the sheets of rain. A lone motorcycle sat tilted against the guardrail, steam rising from its engine. Beside it, a tall figure in black leather struggled with what looked like a broken chain. Most people would have driven past without a second thought, especially a young woman alone on a deserted stretch of highway. But Sarah had been raised by her grandmother, who always said that helping others was the only way to invite good things into your own life. She grabbed the emergency umbrella from her back seat and stepped into the storm. The wind nearly knocked her over as she approached the stranded biker. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and even in the dim light of her car's headlights, she could see he was surprised. His dark eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. "Need some help?" She shouted over the thunder, holding the umbrella over both of them. The man straightened up slowly. He was tall, probably 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his leather jacket perfectly. His black hair was soaked and pushed back from his face, revealing sharp cheekbones and a strong jawline. There was something dangerous about him, but not in a way that scared her. Instead, it intrigued her. "You shouldn't stop for strangers," he said, his voice deep and slightly accented. "Especially not in weather like this." Sarah smiled, rain dripping from her chin. "My grandmother always told me that strangers are just friends we haven't met yet. Besides, you look like you could use a hand." He stared at her for a long moment, as if no one had ever offered to help him before. "The chain snapped about 10 minutes ago. I've been trying to fix it, but I think I need tools I don't have." "I don't know much about motorcycles," Sarah admitted, "but there's a 24-hour garage about 5 miles up the road. I could give you a ride there, and they might have a tow truck." The stranger hesitated. Sarah could see him weighing his options. Looking back at his expensive-looking bike and then at her beat-up Honda, she wondered what he was thinking. Most people would jump at the chance to get out of the storm. "I don't even know your name," he said finally. Sarah Martinez." She extended her hand, which looked small and pale next to his large, calloused one when he shook it. "Marco," he replied simply. As if giving just his first name was all anyone needed to know about him, thunder crashed overhead and Sarah flinched. The storm was getting worse and they were both getting soaked despite the umbrella. "Look, Marco, we can stand here and get struck by lightning while we exchange life stories. Or you can let me help you get somewhere dry." "What's it going to be?" For the first time since she'd approached him, Marco smiled. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger and less intimidating. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who would mind their own business." He glanced at his motorcycle one more time, then pulled a heavy chain from around his neck and locked it to the bike's frame. "Let's go before this storm gets any worse." As they ran toward her car, Sarah couldn't help but notice how he stayed slightly behind her, as if protecting her from the wind and rain. When they reached her Honda, he opened the passenger door for her before going around to the other side. Such an old-fashioned gesture from someone who looked like he'd stepped out of a motorcycle magazine. Inside the car, the atmosphere changed completely. The space felt smaller with him in it, and Sarah was suddenly aware of how he filled the passenger seat, how his presence seemed to charge the air between them. She started the engine and cranked up the heat, glancing sideways at him as she pulled back onto the highway. "So what brings you out on a night like this?" she asked, trying to make conversation as she navigated the flooded road. Marco was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Business. I had some things to take care of in the city." There was something in the way he said "business" that made Sarah think it wasn't the kind of job that came with a nice office and regular hours. But everyone had their secrets and she wasn't one to pry. "What about you?" he asked, turning to study her profile in the dashboard light. "Most people wouldn't stop to help a stranger on a night like this." Sarah shrugged, keeping her eyes on the road. "I work at Murphy's Diner downtown." Tonight was a double shift because one of the other girls called in sick. I was just trying to get home before the storm hit. She laughed softly. Guess I didn't make it? Murphy's Diner? Marco's voice changed slightly, became more interested. I know that place. Small joint with the red booths and the pie case by the register? That's the one. You've been there? Once or twice. He paused. Do you like working there? The question seemed oddly personal coming from someone she'd just met, but something about Marco made her want to answer honestly. It pays the bills. I'm saving up for nursing school, so every shift gets me a little closer to that goal. She felt rather than saw him turn to look at her more intently. Nursing school. That's a big dream. Everyone needs dreams, Sarah said simply. What's yours? The silence that followed was so long and heavy that Sarah began to regret asking. When Marco finally answered, his voice was barely above a whisper. I used to think I knew. Now I'm not so sure. The garage appeared ahead of them, its neon sign cutting through the rain like a beacon. As Sarah pulled into the parking lot, she couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was about to change everything. She just had no idea how much. The garage was busy despite the late hour, filled with the smell of motor oil and coffee. Sarah sat in the waiting area while Marco talked to the mechanic about arranging a tow for his motorcycle. She watched him through the window, noticing how the mechanic's entire demeanor changed when Marco spoke to him. The older man went from casual to almost deferential, nodding eagerly at everything Marco said. When Marco returned, he carried 2 steaming cups of coffee and wore a puzzled expression. They're sending a truck out tonight, he said, settling into the plastic chair beside her. No charge. That's nice of them, Sarah said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Must be because of the storm. Marco's dark eyes studied her face. Maybe. He didn't sound convinced, but he didn't elaborate either. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain pound against the garage windows. Sarah found herself stealing glances at her unexpected companion. In the fluorescent light, she could see him more clearly. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, and his hands, wrapped around the coffee cup, bore several rings that looked expensive. Very expensive? Can I ask you something? Marco said suddenly. Sure. Why did you really stop tonight? You could have been hurt picking up a stranger like that. Sarah considered the question seriously. I guess because I know what it's like to need help and not have anyone offer it. When I was 16, my car broke down on the way home from my job at the grocery store. I stood in the rain for 2 hours before someone finally stopped. It was an elderly couple, and they not only gave me a ride home, but came back the next day to help my grandmother get my car fixed. And that made you want to help others? It made me realize that small acts of kindness can change someone's entire day. Maybe even their entire life. She smiled. Besides, you didn't exactly look threatening. More like a lost puppy than a dangerous stranger. Marco laughed, a rich sound that made something warm unfurl in Sarah's chest. A lost puppy. That's definitely a first? You're not from around here, are you? Sarah asked, picking up on his slight accent again. I grew up in the city. Different neighborhood from this one. The way he said it suggested his neighborhood and hers were worlds apart. Before Sarah could ask more questions, the mechanic appeared in the doorway. Mr. Rossi, your bike's loaded and ready to go. Tommy's driving it to Precision Motors on 5th Street like you asked. Perfect. Thank you, Pete. Marco stood and pulled out a roll of bills that made Sarah's eyes widen. He peeled off several hundreds and handed them to the mechanic, who stammered his thanks. As they walked back to Sarah's car, she couldn't help but comment. That was a lot of money for a tow truck. Marco shrugged. Pete's a good man. He has a family to feed. The way he said it, so casually as if carrying around hundreds of dollars in cash was perfectly normal, made Sarah wonder exactly what kind of business Marco was in. The expensive rings, the deference from the mechanic, the easy way he threw money around, it all painted a picture of someone with serious wealth and possibly serious power. Back in her car, Sarah realized she didn't know where to take him. Where can I drop you off? The Meridian Hotel downtown, if you don't mind. It's probably out of your way. Sarah knew the Meridian. It was the kind of place where rooms cost more per night than she made in a week at the diner. It's not too far out of my way. She lied. As she drove through the storm-soaked city streets, Marco surprised her by asking personal questions. He wanted to know about her family, her dreams, her favorite books. She found herself talking more than she usually did with strangers, something about his quiet attention making her feel like every word mattered. "So your grandmother raised you?" he asked after she mentioned her childhood. "After my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Grandma Elena took me in without question. She worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat and still managed to make sure I stayed in school. She sounds like an amazing woman." She was. She passed away 2 years ago. Sarah's voice softened. "She's the reason I want to be a nurse. She always said healing people was the most important work anyone could do." Marco was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "She would be proud of who you've become." The simple words, spoken with such certainty, brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. "How could you possibly know that? You just met me?" "Because," Marco said, turning to look at her fully, "you stopped to help a stranger in a storm. Because you worked double shifts to chase your dreams. Because you talk about your grandmother with love instead of bitterness, even though losing her must have hurt terribly. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. She wasn't used to such direct, meaningful compliments. Most of the men she met were more interested in her appearance than her character. When they pulled up to the Meridian, Marco didn't immediately get out. Instead, he sat looking at the hotel's imposing facade, then back at Sarah. "I want to see you again," he said simply. Sarah's heart skipped. "I don't even know your last name. Rossi, Marco Rossi." He pulled out his phone. "Can I have your number?" As Sarah gave him her number, she noticed his phone was the latest, most expensive model. Everything about Marco suggested wealth, but there was something else too. An edge of danger that both excited and worried her. "Sarah," he said as he prepared to get out of the car, "I want you to know that tonight meant something to me. More than you might realize. It was just a ride to a garage." Marco's dark eyes were intense in the hotel's bright lights. "No, it wasn't. It was much more than that." After he disappeared into the hotel's elegant lobby, Sarah sat in her car for several minutes, trying to process what had happened. She had the strangest feeling that her life had just taken a dramatic turn, and she had no idea where it might lead. As she drove home to her small apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about Marco Rossi. There was mystery surrounding him. Layers she sensed but couldn't understand. But there was also something else, a loneliness that seemed to mirror her own, and a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his dangerous appearance. Her phone buzzed with a text message just as she was pulling into her parking space. It was from an unknown number. "Thank you for tonight, Angel. Sweet dreams." Sarah smiled as she read it, her heart fluttering in a way it hadn't in years. Whatever Marco Rossi's story was, she found herself hoping she would be part of it. 3 days later, Sarah was refilling coffee cups during the morning rush when she looked up to see Marco sliding into booth 7. Her heart did that fluttering thing again, and she nearly spilled hot coffee on Mrs. Henderson's lap. "Sorry," she mumbled to the elderly regular, but her eyes stayed fixed on Marco. He looked different in daylight, still handsome and mysterious, but somehow more approachable in his dark jeans and simple gray sweater. Well, said Dolores, the other waitress working the morning shift. "Looks like someone's got an admirer. That man has been watching you since he walked in." Sarah smoothed her apron and walked over to his table, trying to appear casual despite her racing pulse. "Can I get you something to eat, or are you just here for the coffee?" Marco's smile was warm and genuine. "I hear the apple pie is amazing." "It's my grandmother's recipe," Sarah said, feeling proud. "The owner bought the diner from her estate, but he kept using her recipes." "Then I'll definitely have a slice and coffee," he paused. "And I was hoping maybe you'd have a break soon? I'd like to talk to you." Sarah glanced around the busy diner. It was nearly 10, and the morning rush was starting to slow down. I can take 15 minutes in about 10 minutes. When she brought his pie and coffee, Marco's eyes lit up at the first bite. This is incredible. Your grandmother must have been an amazing cook. She was amazing at everything, Sarah said softly. I'll be back in a few minutes. Those few minutes felt like hours. Sarah found herself checking her reflection in every shiny surface, wondering what Marco wanted to talk about. When she finally slid into the booth across from him, her palms were sweating. I wanted to thank you again for the other night, Marco said, his dark eyes serious. And I wanted to ask if you'd like to have dinner with me tomorrow evening. Sarah felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. Like a date? Exactly like a date, Marco's smile was gentle. There's a quiet Italian place I know. Nothing fancy, just good food and a chance to talk without the storm in the garage? I'd like that, Sarah said, surprised by her own boldness. Perfect, I'll pick you up at 7. Sarah gave him her address, and they spent the rest of her break talking about movies and books. She discovered that Marco read poetry in his spare time and had strong opinions about classic films. He seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts on everything from nursing to her favorite TV shows when her break ended. Marco left a $20 tip on an $8 check. Before Sarah could protest, he was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of his cologne and the promise of tomorrow night. The next evening, Sarah changed clothes 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress that her grandmother had always said brought out her eyes. She was still fussing with her hair when the doorbell rang exactly at 7. Marco stood on her doorstep holding a single white rose, looking devastatingly handsome in black pants and a charcoal gray button-down shirt. You look beautiful, he said simply, and Sarah felt her cheeks warm. Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself. The restaurant was a small family-owned place in Little Italy, with checkered tablecloths and candles flickering in wine bottles. Marco was greeted by name by the owner, an elderly Italian man who fussed over them both and insisted they try his special linguine. You come here often? Sarah asked as they settled at a corner table. My family has been eating here for years, Marco said, then seemed to catch himself. I mean, I've been coming here since I was a kid. Sarah noticed the slip, but didn't comment on it. Instead, she focused on how comfortable Marco seemed here, how the staff treated him with a mixture of respect and affection that suggested he was more than just a regular customer. Over dinner, their conversation flowed easily. Marco was an excellent listener, asking thoughtful questions about her dreams and memories. He wanted to know about her grandmother's immigration story, her favorite childhood memories, her hopes for the future. What about you? Sarah asked as they shared tiramisu for dessert. What are your dreams? Marco was quiet for a long moment, swirling wine in his glass. I used to think I knew exactly what I wanted from life. Everything was planned out, predetermined. But lately I've been wondering if maybe I want something different. Different how? Simpler, more real. His eyes met hers across the table. Meeting you made me realize that I've been missing something important. What's that? Connection. Real connection with someone who sees me as just a person, not as... He trailed off, seeming to catch himself again. Not as what? Marco reached across the table and took her hand. His was warm and strong, completely enveloping hers. Just not as who I usually am. There was something in his voice that suggested layers of meaning Sarah didn't understand, but she didn't want to push. Everyone had parts of their life they preferred to keep private, at least in the beginning. After dinner, Marco walked her to his car, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than Sarah's annual salary. She was starting to get a clearer picture of just how different their backgrounds were, but somehow it didn't seem to matter when he looked at her the way he was looking at her now. I had a wonderful time tonight, she said, as they stood outside her apartment building. So did I. Marco stepped closer, his hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. Sarah, I want you to know that this is new for me. Getting to know someone slowly. What do you usually do? Marco's smile was rueful. Usually, people know who I am before I even introduce myself. They want things from me, or they're afraid of me. You're the first person in years who's just talked to me like I'm a normal person. Before Sarah could ask what he meant by that, Marco leaned down and kissed her softly. It was gentle and sweet, and perfect, lasting just long enough to make her want more. When they broke apart, Sarah felt dizzy. Wow, wow, Marco agreed, his voice slightly rough. I should go up, Sarah said reluctantly. You should, Marco agreed, but neither of them moved. Finally, Marco stepped back with obvious effort. I'll call you tomorrow? I'd like that. As Sarah watched his car disappear down the street, she touched her lips where she could still feel the warmth of his kiss. Everything about Marco intrigued her. His gentleness mixed with an undercurrent of danger, his obvious wealth contrasted. With his down-to-earth personality, his mysterious references to a life he seemed reluctant to explain. She was falling for him and falling fast. The smart part of her brain whispered warnings about getting involved with someone who was clearly keeping secrets. But her heart was already too invested to listen to smart advice. Upstairs in her apartment, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text. Thank you for a perfect evening. Sleep well, beautiful. As she got ready for bed, Sarah couldn't stop smiling. Whatever Marco's secrets were, she was willing to be patient. Some things were worth waiting for, and the way Marco looked at her like she was precious and rare made her feel like she might be worth waiting for too. 2 weeks of perfect dates followed that magical first evening. Marco took Sarah to art museums and small jazz clubs, to bookstores and quiet cafes. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, and Sarah found herself falling deeper in love with this mysterious, gentle man who seemed to treasure every moment they spent together, but she was also growing more curious about the parts of his life he never discussed. Marco never talked about his job, never mentioned friends or family, and always paid for everything in cash from a roll of bills that would have choked a horse. When she asked about his work, he would deflect with a smile and change the subject. The truth came crashing down on a Thursday evening when Sarah was closing up the diner alone. She was wiping down the last table when 3 men in expensive suits walked in, their eyes scanning the empty restaurant before settling on her. We're closed, Sarah said, her instincts telling her something was wrong about these men. They moved with a predatory grace that made her skin crawl. We're not here for food, sweetheart, said the tallest one, a man with cold blue eyes and prematurely gray hair. We're here to talk about Marco Rossi. Sarah's blood went cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. The man stepped closer, and Sarah caught sight of a gun holster under his jacket. You're the little waitress who's been keeping our Marco busy lately. Very busy. I think you have me confused with someone else, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady as she backed toward the kitchen. Sarah Martinez, age 24, lives at 847 Maple Street. Apartment 3B, saves every penny for nursing school. Sweet little girl who stops to help strangers in storms. The man's smile was cold as ice. Did Marco tell you what he does for a living, sweetheart? He's in business, Sarah whispered, her back hitting the counter. The 3 men laughed, and the sound made Sarah's skin crawl. Business. That's one way to put it. The leader pulled out his phone and showed her a newspaper clipping. Recognize him? Sarah's heart stopped. The headline read, Mafia Prince takes control of family operations, and below it was a photo of Marco, in a perfectly tailored suit, looking nothing like the gentle man who brought her flowers and read her poetry. Marco Rossi, the man continued conversationally, is the heir to one of the most powerful crime families on the East Coast. His father died 6 months ago, and Marco's been taking over the family business ever since. Drugs, gambling, extortion, murder, you name it, the Rossi family has their fingers in it. Sarah felt like she was going to be sick. You're lying? Am I? The man's voice was mocking. Ask him yourself. Ask Marco about the warehouse fire last month. Ask him about the 3 men who disappeared after crossing his family. Ask him about the blood on his hands. What do you want? Sarah managed to whisper. We want you to give Marco a message. Tell him that the Castellanos remember our agreement. Tell him that he has until Sunday to honor his father's promise, or things are going to get very unpleasant for everyone he cares about. The man's eyes raked over Sarah in a way that made her skin crawl. starting with pretty little waitresses who don't know any better than to fall for killers. Before Sarah could respond, the men were gone, leaving her shaking and nauseated in the empty diner. She sank onto a stool, her mind reeling. Everything Marco had told her was a lie? The gentle poetry lover, the man who tipped mechanics hundreds of dollars out of kindness, it was all an act. He was a criminal. A killer. Sarah's phone rang, and Marco's name appeared on the screen. She stared at it until it stopped ringing, then started again immediately. On the third call, she finally answered. "Angel, I was starting to worry," Marco's familiar voice said, warm with affection. "I tried calling earlier, but it went straight to voicemail." "I was working," Sarah said, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. "Are you okay?" "You sound upset." Sarah closed her eyes. She could picture him wherever he was, probably in that expensive hotel room, genuinely concerned about her welfare. Except now she knew that those same hands that held her so gently had probably killed people. "I need to see you," she said. "Of course. I can pick you up in 20 minutes. "No," the word came out sharper than she intended. "I'll meet you somewhere." "Neutral ground." There was a pause. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "Just tell me where to meet you." Marco gave her the address of a small park downtown, and Sarah hung up without saying goodbye. She sat in the empty diner for several more minutes, trying to figure out what she was going to do. Part of her wanted to run, to disappear and never see Marco again. But a larger part needed to hear the truth from him, needed to know if anything between them had been real. The park was nearly empty when Sarah arrived. She found Marco sitting on a bench by the fountain, his dark hair gleaming under the streetlights. He stood when he saw her, his face lighting up with that smile she had come to love. The smile that now seemed like a lie. "There's my beautiful girl," he said, opening his arms for their usual embrace. Sarah stayed where she was. "We need to talk." Marco's smile faded as he took in her rigid posture and the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "What happened?" "Some men came to the diner tonight. They knew who I was. They knew about us." Sarah's voice was shaking now. "They told me things about you, Marco, horrible things." Marco went very still. When he spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. "What kind of things?" "They said you're in the Mafia. They said you kill people." Sarah's tears were falling freely now. "They said your family controls drugs and gambling and that you took over when your father died." Marco closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, all the warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and resigned. "What else did they tell you?" "That's all true, isn't it?" Sarah whispered. "Everything they said. You're not just some businessman. You're a criminal, yes." The single word hit Sarah like a physical blow. "My God, Marco, who are you?" Marco ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking older and more tired. "I'm exactly who I've been with you, Sarah. Everything between us has been real. But yes, I'm also Marco Rossi, heir to a crime family that my great-grandfather built from nothing. I'm a man who has done terrible things because it was expected of me. Because it was my duty." Sarah backed away from him. "Duty? You call murder a duty?" "I call survival a duty." Marco's voice was flat, emotionless. "I call protecting the people I love a duty. And yes, sometimes that means making choices that other people can't understand. How many people have you killed?" The question came out as a whisper. Marco looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah saw something break behind his eyes. "Too many." Sarah felt like the ground was falling away beneath her feet. The man she had fallen in love with was a killer, a criminal. Everything she thought she knew about him was a lie. "The men who came tonight," she said, her voice stronger now, "they want you to honor some agreement your father made. They said you have until Sunday." Marco's expression turned dangerous, and for the first time since she'd known him, Sarah felt afraid. "The Castellanos came to you? They threatened you?" "They said things would get unpleasant for everyone you care about if you don't do what they want." Marco was on his feet now, pacing like a caged animal. "Those bastards. They have no right to involve you in this." "Involve me?" Sarah's voice rose. "I'm already involved, Marco. I'm involved because I fell in love with you without knowing who you really are. Marco stopped pacing and turned to look at her. You love me? Sarah laughed bitterly. I thought I did. But I don't even know you, do I? I fell in love with a lie. It wasn't a lie, Marco said urgently, stepping toward her. Sarah, everything I've been with you is real. The way I feel about you is real. You make me want to be a different person. But you're not a different person, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. You're a killer, Marco, and I can't be with someone like that. I won't be. Sarah didn't sleep for 3 days. She called in sick to work and stayed in her apartment, jumping at every sound and checking the locks on her door obsessively. Marco tried calling dozens of times, but she let every call go to voicemail. His messages grew increasingly desperate, begging her to let him explain, to let him protect her from the Castellanos. On Friday evening there was a soft knock at her door. Sarah froze, her heart hammering. Through the peephole she saw Marco standing in the hallway, looking haggard and exhausted. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his hair messy, his shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. Sarah, please, he said softly, as if he knew she was watching. I know you're afraid of me now, and you have every right to be. But there are things you need to know. Things about Sunday. Against her better judgment, Sarah opened the door but left the chain on. What things? Marco looked relieved just to see her face. Can I come in, please? I swear on my mother's grave that I won't hurt you. I could never hurt you. Sarah studied his face through the narrow opening. He looked broken, desperate. After a long moment she undid the chain and stepped back to let him in. Marco entered slowly, his hands visible and empty. Thank you. Say what you came to say, Sarah said, keeping her distance. Marco nodded, accepting her wariness. The agreement the Castellanos mentioned, it was my father's promise to marry me to Vincent Castellano's daughter. Rosa, it was supposed to unite our families. End years of conflict. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. And I broke the engagement 3 weeks ago. Right after I met you? Marco's eyes were intense, searching her face. I told them I wouldn't marry Rosa, that the old ways of arranged marriages were finished. That nearly started a war. Why are you telling me this? Because Sunday is the deadline they gave me to change my mind. If I don't marry Rosa by Sunday, they're going to start killing people I care about. Starting with you? Sarah sank onto her couch, suddenly feeling weak. You broke your engagement because of me? I broke it because you made me realize what I was missing. What real love could feel like. Marco stayed standing as if he didn't trust himself to get too close to her. Sarah, I've been engaged to Rosa Castellano since I was 18. It was business, a contract between families. But I never touched her, never loved her. I was just going through the motions of a life that was planned for me before I was born. And now? Now I know what it feels like to want to be a better man. You made me want to walk away from all of it. The family business, the violence, everything. But walking away, isn't that simple when you're born into this life? Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. The dangerous edge she'd always sensed was more pronounced now, but underneath it was the same man who had read her poetry and kissed her like she was precious. What happens on Sunday if you don't marry her? Marco's jaw tightened. War, people will die. And the Castellanos will come after everyone I care about until I give them what they want. So you're going to marry her? No. The word was firm, absolute. I'm not going to marry Rosa Castellano. Not for peace, not for business, not for anything. Sarah stared at him. Even if it means people will die? People die in this business anyway, Sarah. At least this way I'm dying for something that matters. Dying? Sarah's voice came out as a squeak. Marco's smile was sad. Did you think I could defy both families and survive? I'm one man, Angel. Even with my father's soldiers behind me, I can't fight the Castellanos forever. Sarah felt tears starting again. Then why? Why throw your life away? Marco crossed the room slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. When she didn't, he knelt in front of her and took her hands in his. Because you made me remember what it feels like to be human. For the first time in my life, I made a choice based on love instead of duty. Even if it destroys me, at least I'll know what it felt like to choose my own path. Marco. I have money hidden away, he continued. Enough for you to disappear, start over somewhere safe. I've already made arrangements. After Sunday, you can go anywhere you want, be anyone you want. You'll never have to worry about money or the Castellanos ever again. Sarah pulled her hands free. You think I want your money? I think I want you to be safe and happy, even if I can't be part of that happiness. They sat in silence for several minutes. Sarah's mind was reeling, trying to process everything Marco had told her. He was willing to die rather than enter a loveless marriage. He was willing to start a war to protect what they had together. It was terrifying and romantic and completely insane. There has to be another way, she said finally. Marco shook his head. I've thought of everything. The only way to end this peacefully is for me to marry Rosa, and I won't do that. I can't pretend to love her when I'm completely in love with you. You love me? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. More than my own life. More than anything I've ever wanted or dreamed of wanting. Marco's eyes were fierce with emotion. I love you enough to let you go if that's what keeps you safe. Sarah studied his face, seeing past the dangerous man to the lonely boy underneath. Despite everything she had learned about him, despite the fear and the horror, she still felt that pull toward him. He was still the man who had held an umbrella over her in the rain, who had listened to her dreams with genuine interest, who had made her feel cherished and beautiful. What if we ran away together? She asked suddenly. What if we both just disappeared? They would find us eventually. And when they did, they would make you pay for my choices. Marco's voice was gentle but firm. I won't let that happen. So what? I'm supposed to just accept that you're going to get yourself killed? Marco reached up and cupped her face in his hands. I'm asking you to let me love you enough to keep you safe. Even if it means breaking both our hearts. Sarah closed her eyes and leaned into his touch. For the first time in days, she felt some of the tension leave her body. Whatever Marco was, whatever he had done, he loved her. And despite everything, she loved him too. I don't want you to die, she whispered. I don't want to die either. But I'd rather die as the man who loved you than live as the man who gave you up for duty. When Sarah opened her eyes, Marco was looking at her with such tenderness that her heart ached. She knew in that moment that she was going to make a choice that would change her life forever. The smart thing would be to take his money and disappear, to start over somewhere safe and try to forget Marco Rossi ever existed. But sometimes the smart choice wasn't the right choice. What if I don't want to be safe? She asked. What if I want to stay and fight for what we have? Marco's eyes went wide. Sarah, no. You don't understand what you're saying. I understand perfectly. Sarah's voice was stronger now, filled with determination. I understand that I love you too, Marco, all of you. Even the parts that scare me. Angel. And I understand that some things are worth fighting for. Some things are worth the risk. Marco searched her face desperately. If you stay, there's no going back. Once you're part of this world, there's no walking away clean. Sarah took his face in her hands, mirroring his gesture. Then I guess we better make sure we win. Saturday night felt like the calm before a storm. Marco had tried one last time to convince Sarah to take his money and run, but she had refused. Instead, she spent the evening helping him prepare for what might be their last night together. They didn't talk about the meeting with the Castellanos, scheduled for Sunday evening. Instead, they cooked dinner together in Marco's hotel suite, moving around each other in the kitchen like they had been doing it for years. Marco taught Sarah how to make his grandmother's marinara sauce, and she showed him how to braid bread the way her own grandmother had taught her as they ate by candlelight. Sarah studied Marco's face, memorizing every detail. Tomorrow, everything would change. Either they would find a way to build a life together, or they would lose each other forever. I have something for you. Marco said as they finished dessert. He disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a small velvet box. Sarah's heart stopped for a moment, but when he opened it, she saw not an engagement ring but a delicate gold locket. "It was my mother's," Marco said softly, taking it from the box. "She died when I was 10, but I remember her wearing this every day. She told me once that it held the most important thing in the world. What's inside it?" Sarah asked as Marco fastened the chain around her neck. "Nothing yet. But she said that when I found the person I wanted to spend my life with, I would know what belonged in there." Sarah touched the locket, feeling its weight against her chest. "Marco, I know we don't know what tomorrow will bring," he said, taking her hands across the table. "But I want you to know that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. Whatever else happens, you saved me, Sarah. You made me remember what it felt like to be human." That night they made love with a desperation and tenderness that spoke of everything they couldn't put into words. Afterwards, Sarah lay awake in Marco's arms, listening to his heartbeat and praying that it wouldn't be the last time. Sunday arrived gray and cold. Marco was already awake when Sarah opened her eyes, staring out the window at the city below. "Second thoughts?" she asked softly. "About you?" "Never." Marco turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious. "About putting you in danger?" "Every second." "It's too late for second thoughts now," Sarah said, moving to sit beside him on the edge of the bed. "We're in this together." Marco had explained the plan the night before. The meeting with the Castellanos was set for 8 o'clock at a warehouse on the docks. Neutral ground, supposedly, with representatives from both families present. Marco would officially refuse the marriage and offer alternative terms for peace between the families. "And if they refuse the alternative terms?" Sarah had asked. "Then we find out how much fight is left in the old lion," Marco had replied grimly. Now, as Sunday evening approached, Sarah felt surprisingly calm. She had called in sick to work again, spent the day reading and writing in her journal. If something happened to her, she wanted there to be a record of these past few weeks, of what it felt like to fall in love with Marco Rossi. At 7:30, Marco's phone rang. He answered it with a sharp yes, and listened intently. "Understood," he said finally, hanging up. "It's time." Sarah stood and smoothed her simple black dress. She had chosen it carefully, elegant enough to show respect, practical enough to run in if necessary. "You don't have to do this," Marco said one last time. "Yes, I do," Sarah replied firmly. "You're not facing this alone." The warehouse was exactly as atmospheric as every movie had led Sarah to expect. Dim lighting, concrete floors, the smell of salt water and motor oil. The Castellano family was already there when they arrived, clustered around a table in the center of the space. Sarah recognized the gray-haired man who had threatened her at the diner. "Marco," Vincent Castellano called out as they approached. "And the pretty little waitress?" "How romantic." "Vincent," Marco replied coolly. "Where's Rosa?" "Right here, darling," came a voice from behind them. Sarah turned to see a stunning woman with dark hair and cold eyes approaching. Rosa Castellano was everything Sarah wasn't: sophisticated, polished, born into this world of power and danger. "Hello, Marco," Rosa said, her voice like honey over steel. "Ready to come to your senses?" "I've never been more clear-headed in my life," Marco replied. "I'm not marrying you, Rosa. Not today. Not ever." Vincent Castellano's face darkened. "Then you've made your choice. You're willing to start a war over this little nobody?" "I'm willing to start a war over the right to choose my own life," Marco said firmly. "But I'm also willing to offer you something better than an unwilling son-in-law." "What could possibly be better than uniting our families?" Marco pulled out a folder and set it on the table. "Complete control of the shipping operations on the East Docks. Worth approximately $50 million annually. Consider it my dowry." Vincent's eyes narrowed as he flipped through the documents. "You're giving up the most profitable part of your territory?" "I'm choosing love over money." "Something your generation never understood." The warehouse fell silent as Vincent studied the papers. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Everything depended on whether the Castellanos valued money more than tradition. "It's a generous offer," Vincent said finally. "But it doesn't address the matter of respect. You humiliated my daughter by breaking this engagement publicly." Then let me address that, Rosa spoke up suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. I have something to confess, Daddy. I've been seeing someone too. Vincent's face went white. What? His name is David Chun. He's a doctor, completely outside our world. And I love him. Rosa's voice was steady, defiant. I've been trying to figure out how to get out of this marriage without starting a war myself. The warehouse erupted in angry Italian voices as Vincent and his men shouted at Rosa, but through the chaos, Sarah heard something else, relief in Rosa's voice. Genuine relief. When the shouting died down, Vincent looked between his daughter and Marco with a mixture of fury and grudging respect. You're both willing to throw away everything for love? He asked. Yes, Marco and Rosa said simultaneously. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents in front of him. Finally, he looked up. The shipping operation. Plus a formal apology from both families for this mess. Plus my daughter gets her doctor without interference from anyone in this room. Done? Marco said immediately. And one more thing, Vincent added, his eyes moving to Sarah. The girl comes to Sunday dinner next week. If she's going to be part of this family, she better learn what that means. Sarah felt Marco's hand tighten around hers. Does that mean that... It means welcome to the family, kid, Vincent said, with something that might have been a smile. God help you both. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the small church where her grandmother had been married, wearing a simple white dress and her mother's pearls. Marco waited for her at the altar in a perfectly tailored black suit, his eyes bright with unshed tears as she walked down the aisle. In the front pew sat Vincent Castellano next to Rosa and her new fiancé, David. Behind them were Marco's soldiers and their families, tough men and women who had accepted Sarah as their new princess with surprising warmth. As Sarah reached the altar and took Marco's hands, she thought about that stormy night that had changed everything. She had stopped to help a stranger and found the love of her life. It hadn't been easy. There had been difficult conversations about Marco's past, painful adjustments to a world where violence was always lurking in the shadows, and the constant challenge of building trust with people who lived by different rules. But there had also been incredible love, fierce loyalty, and the knowledge that she and Marco had chosen each other against impossible odds. You sure about this, Angel? Marco whispered as the priest began the ceremony. Sarah looked into his dark eyes and saw their future, complicated, probably dangerous, but filled with a love that had already survived everything the world could throw at it. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, she whispered back as they exchanged vows in front of their unusual congregation. Sarah touched the locket at her throat. That morning, Marco had shown her what he wanted to put inside it, a tiny photo of them together from their first date, both of them laughing at something silly he had said. The most important thing in the world, he had explained, echoing his mother's words, love. It really could conquer all, even the darkness that surrounded them. Sarah had learned that some storms were worth walking into, especially when you found someone willing to hold an umbrella over both of you while you figured out how to build a life together. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Marco's kiss was gentle and full of promise. As the congregation erupted in cheers and applause, Sarah knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. After all, they had already survived the storm,